You are living in a world divided by a single devastating truth. There are those who wound with words and those who bleed from them. The moment your blood shows, the game is over. Niccolo Machiavelli grasped something that continues to elude most minds today. Words thrown like daggers aren't simply outbursts of fury or contempt. They are careful invitations to expose your vulnerabilities, to reveal the invisible chains around your emotions, to demonstrate precisely how effortlessly someone else can drag you into their psychological territory. Most believe they are protecting their dignity when they strike back, yet all they accomplish is confirming that the weapon found its mark. Now your attacker possesses the exact coordinates for their next assault, and everyone watching has learned where you can be broken. But how did Machiavelli transform these verbal attacks? Not through pleading, not through counter-arguments, not through vengeance. He executed something far more devastating. He weaponized the insult to restructure the entire hierarchy of influence in that space, understanding that the objective was never to triumph in the exchange. The objective was to demonstrate that you were never participating in their contest. And the moment you achieve this, the one hurling insults diminishes while you remain unmoved. Allow me to dissect this phenomenon. Begin by comprehending the mechanics of verbal assault. Words alone are never the true weapon. An insult functions as a psychological probe, engineered to compel you into one of three foreseeable reactions. Justify yourself and validate that their words possess authority. Retaliate and reveal your emotional investment, or comply and expose that you prefer conformity over confrontation. Yet there exists a fourth path, more frigid, more silent, more lethal. Machiavelli refused to offer reactions. He offered context. He understood that whoever commands the context commands the story being told. And the instant you enter the insulter's emotional battlefield, you have already surrendered control of that narrative. So he never entered. He positioned himself above it. He made his silence carry more weight than any retaliation. He made his stillness more intimidating than any words. He never responded to the insult. He redefined its meaning entirely. When mockery was directed toward him, he never smirked. He never averted his gaze. He observed them with quiet intensity, with focused calculation, as if communicating, "I am not wounded. I am strategizing." And this response fractured the room's dynamic. Because no one trembles before a man consumed by rage, but everyone trembles before the man who absorbs an insult and offers nothing in return. Why does this create such unease? Because it signals one reality. He has witnessed this pattern before, and he has already determined what unfolds next. This is true presence. This is authentic control. And this is why verbal attacks ceased to amuse when aimed at Machiavelli. Because the aggressor never received a reaction. He received silence, followed by consequences, delivered at a later moment, indirectly, and with clinical precision. You wish to shatter someone's psychological armor? Remain motionless when they anticipate fury. Maintain composure when they expect suffering. Do not move at all. Force them to become uncomfortable with the sound of their own aggression. Because the instant they recognize you will not flinch, their power dissolves completely. But Machiavelli's understanding extended beyond this. He recognized that silence transcends mere resistance. It becomes strategic positioning. When someone hurls an insult at you publicly, and you remain completely still, something extraordinary occurs. The atmosphere begins to transform. Attention shifts. People pause. They anticipate an explosion, yet it never materializes. Instead, you regard the insulter as if they exist beneath your consideration, as if they have just revealed their own weakness. And this is when the observers begin to recalibrate their understanding. Why is there no response? Does he possess knowledge we lack? Is this insult actually powerless? Is the aggressor the genuine fool? And in this way, You have redirected social perception without making a single gesture. Because here lies what most fail to understand. Insults only inflict damage when they strike something authentic. If someone brands you a coward and cowardice lives within you, you recoil. If they label you weak and you harbor secret fears about your strength, you respond defensively. If they ridicule your history and you have not made peace with your past, you spiral into chaos. But if you have already confronted your darkness, if you understand your flaws and refuse to hide from them, then the insult becomes like a boomerang. It strikes nothing substantial and returns to the hand that launched it. This represents the Machiavellian advantage, self-knowledge so precise it renders you immune to verbal attack, because no one can weaponize what you have already acknowledged and integrated. No one can destabilize what you have already mastered. No one can unbalance a person who has already fought and won the war within themselves. The ancient Stoics understood this principle, though they approached it differently. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the futility of being disturbed by opinions that hold no truth. But Machiavelli took this insight and sharpened it into something more practical, more immediately applicable to the political and social realities of power. He understood that in the theater of human interaction, perception often becomes reality, and whoever controls the perception of an exchange controls its outcome. Consider the neurological reality behind this dynamic. When you react emotionally to an insult, your amygdala hijacks your prefrontal cortex. This is what psychologists call amygdala hijacking. Your rational mind goes offline, and your primitive brain takes control. You become reactive rather than responsive. You operate from survival mode rather than strategic thinking. The insulter has successfully dragged you into their emotional state, and now you are both operating from the same low level of consciousness. But when you remain still, when you refuse to be pulled into this reactive state, you maintain access to your higher cognitive functions. You can observe the situation clearly, assess the dynamics at play, and choose your response, or lack thereof, from a place of conscious authority rather than unconscious reaction. This is what Machiavelli intuited centuries before neuroscience could explain it. Emotional regulation is a form of psychological dominance. Yet here is where most people misunderstand the Machiavellian approach. They think it means becoming cold, calculating, manipulative in the modern sense of the word. But Machiavelli was not advocating for sociopathy. He was advocating for emotional sovereignty, the ability to choose your response rather than being controlled by your reactions. There is a profound difference between suppressing emotions and transcending emotional reactivity. When you suppress emotions, you create internal pressure that eventually explodes. When you transcend emotional reactivity, you feel the emotion but do not become it. You observe the insulter's attempt to provoke you with the same detached interest you might observe a weather pattern. It is happening, you are aware of it, but you are not swept away by it. But let us venture into even colder territory. Machiavelli did not merely neutralize insults, he occasionally invited them. What was his reasoning? Because he sought to expose those who opposed him. He understood that the person who insults first nearly always reveals their own insecurity. So he constructed situations where people felt sufficiently comfortable to speak carelessly. He would offer subtle observations and that remained just ambiguous enough to trigger a fragile sense of self-worth. And once the insult emerged, he possessed them completely, because they had now revealed emotion. They had shown where they could be wounded. They could never retract those words. This technique requires extraordinary self-control and emotional maturity. You must be so secure in your own identity that you can afford to appear vulnerable in order to draw out your opponent's true nature. It is like a master chess player sacrificing a piece to expose the opponent's king. You give up something apparent to gain something essential, insight into their psychological landscape. The Renaissance courts where Machiavelli operated were laboratories of human psychology. Nobles and diplomats engaged in constant verbal sparring, testing each other's weaknesses, forming and breaking alliances based on who could maintain composure under pressure. In this environment, the ability to remain unruffled while others revealed their insecurities was not just socially advantageous, it was a matter of political survival. Modern research in social psychology confirms what Machiavelli observed. People who maintain emotional equilibrium during conflict are perceived as more competent, more trustworthy, and more powerful than those who become emotionally reactive. The person who loses their cool loses more than just their temper. They lose social status, credibility, and influence. This is the snare most people stumble into. They insult to feel powerful, but in the presence of someone who refuses to react, that power crumbles into embarrassment. Because now everyone witnesses it clearly. They lashed out to prove something, and their attempt failed completely. You wish to dismantle someone who holds high status? Allow them to insult you in front of others. Remain silent. Look at them as if they have just committed an error. Then continue forward without uttering a word. The silence will pursue them like a specter. People will remember what you chose not to do, and the absence of your response will communicate more powerfully than any clever comeback could ever achieve. Machiavelli never conquered through overwhelming force. He conquered by observing others expose themselves and simply ensuring the right people witnessed it. But understand this: the Machiavellian approach is not about winning in the conventional sense. It is about transcending the game entirely. When someone insults you, they are trying to drag you into a contest of egos. They want to prove they can affect you, control you, diminish you. By refusing to participate, you demonstrate something far more powerful than victory. You demonstrate irrelevance. Their attempt to engage you in combat becomes meaningless because you were never truly present as an opponent. This concept extends beyond individual interactions into broader patterns of social dynamics. Observe how certain public figures handle criticism and insults. Those who react defensively to every slight often find themselves constantly embattled, their energy scattered across multiple fronts of conflict. But those who respond selectively, or not at all, to provocations, maintain their focus and their dignity. They understand that not every challenge deserves acknowledgement. Not every insult warrants a response. The psychological term for this is emotional labor, the energy required to manage your emotional responses and those of others. When you react to every insult, you are performing emotional labor for your attacker. You are giving them the psychological satisfaction they sought. But when you refuse to react, you force them to confront their own emotions without external validation. This often leads to escalation, as they desperately seek the response they expected. So when you next face an insult, ask yourself this question: do you need to engage in battle, or can you allow them to destroy themselves in real time? Because nothing embodies Machiavellian strategy more than permitting someone to construct their own downfall with their words, while you stand unmoved and untouchable, watching the room's allegiance shift in your favor. There exists a reason Machiavelli never believed in defending your reputation, because the moment you feel compelled to protect your image, you have already acknowledged that someone else controls it. This reveals what insults truly represent: tests of power. They are not launched to defeat you. They are launched to determine if you will defeat yourself. And this is the mistake most people commit. They hear the insult and immediately begin justifying, "That is false. You have misunderstood me. I did not intend it that way." They believe they are correcting perception, but they are actually placing their identity in the hands of their attacker. Now the insulter determines who you are, and you find yourself attempting to negotiate your worth back to yourself. This pattern reveals a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of reputation and identity. Your reputation is not something you own. It is something that exists in the minds of others. The moment you try to control it directly, you have already lost control. But your identity, your authentic sense of self, that belongs to you alone. And when your identity is solid, unshakable, rooted in genuine self-knowledge rather than external validation, then attacks on your reputation become as irrelevant as weather patterns. Machiavelli would identify this for what it represents: a trap designed for the weak. He never defended himself. He never explained. He never corrected falsehoods. He simply rendered the lie irrelevant. Because when your energy remains undisturbed, people assume you possess knowledge they lack. And now they begin questioning the insulter rather than you. This is the reversal. Not through arguing, not through disproving, but through refusing to engage on their level. And this refusal, executed with cold stillness, accomplishes more than silencing the attacker. It transforms the insult into a mirror, because now everyone sees it for its true nature. Not a statement of truth, but a desperate grasp for attention. A final attempt to disturb someone who clearly cannot be disturbed. And what could be more threatening than this? The mirror effect deserves deeper exploration because it reveals the profound psychology behind verbal attacks. When someone insults you and you remain unaffected, the insult has nowhere to go. It cannot penetrate your consciousness, cannot disturb your peace, cannot achieve its intended purpose. So where does it go? It returns to its source, carrying with it all the negative energy that was meant for you. The insulter is forced to confront their own aggression, their own insecurity, their own failure to achieve the psychological dominance they sought. This is why unresponsive targets often become more infuriating to attackers than responsive ones. A person who fights back at least validates the attacker's power to provoke. But a person who remains unmoved invalidates the attack entirely. It is like throwing a punch at someone who simply is not there. All your energy is wasted, and you look foolish in the process. But let us go deeper. Machiavelli did not simply neutralize insults. He understood how to extract value from them. He perceived insults as complementary intelligence gathering. The moment someone insults you, particularly in public, they communicate three essential pieces of information: where their consciousness dwells, because insults always reveal more about the speaker than their target; what they secretly envy, because no one attacks what they do not privately notice; and how they wish others to perceive you, which means they have already acknowledged you as a threat. This intelligence-gathering aspect of insult management is perhaps the most sophisticated element of the Machiavellian approach. Every insult is a psychological X-ray of the person delivering it. When someone calls you arrogant, they are revealing their own struggle with confidence. When they call you manipulative, they are projecting their own desire to control others. When they attack your success, they are exposing their own sense of failure. But more than this, the specific language they choose, the particular vulnerabilities they attempt to exploit, the timing and context of their attack, all of this provides valuable intelligence about their psychological makeup, their strategic thinking, and their emotional triggers. A skilled observer can learn more about an opponent from their insults than from hours of direct conversation. So when someone ridicules your discipline, they reveal insecurity about their own disorder. When they question your achievements, they are haunted by their own failures. When they call you arrogant, it is because they have already compared themselves to you and discovered they fall short. Machiavelli understood this instinctively. He never simply absorbed the insult. He studied it, and in studying it, he identified the precise vulnerability in his attacker's defenses. Most people respond to the insult while ignoring the intelligence it contains. But the Machiavellian listens not for pain, but for advantage. The insult reveals where they suffer, where they experience fear, where they observe you too closely. And now you understand what to never mention, or what to mention at precisely the right moment. This transcends defense. This is strategic warfare. You do not participate in their insulting game. You allow them to reveal their weaknesses while they believe they have wounded you. This intelligence can be used in multiple ways. First, it helps you understand the psychological landscape you are operating in. Who sees you as a threat? Who envies what you have accomplished? Who feels intimidated by your presence? This information is invaluable for navigating complex social and professional environments. Second, it gives you insights into how to interact with these individuals in the future. If someone's insults reveal deep insecurity about their own competence, you know that direct challenges to their ability will provoke disproportionate reactions. If their attacks focus on your past, you understand they are trying to anchor you to an identity you have outgrown. If you're finding value in these insights about power dynamics and psychological strategy, click the like button and subscribe to continue exploring these depths together. Third, and perhaps most importantly, it shows you the gaps in your own psychological armor. While most insults reveal more about the attacker than the target, sometimes they do identify genuine areas where you need to develop greater self-awareness or emotional resilience. Let us examine humiliation. Because sometimes an insult does penetrate your defenses. Sometimes it arrives publicly, loudly, unexpectedly, and for a brief moment, you flinch. Your expression tightens. Your body responds. Everyone observed it. What happens now? Machiavelli would advise you thus: do not attempt to recover. Do not try to improve the situation. Do not explain yourself. Do something far more frigid. Freeze the moment completely, then absorb it entirely. You stare at the attacker, not with anger, but with empty awareness, like you are observing a dog bark meaninglessly. No smile, no words, no tension. Allow everyone to feel the silence expand. Let the discomfort settle upon them, because now the spotlight is not on you. It focuses on how you are managing this moment. And when you do not break, something unsettling occurs. People become uncomfortable, not for you, but for the attacker. They begin to realize, he never even moved. He is not even responding. What manner of person simply accepts it like this? This technique, freezing the moment and absorbing the insult completely, is perhaps the most advanced aspect of Machiavellian insult management. It requires extraordinary self-possession and emotional maturity. You must be able to feel the sting of the insult without being overcome by it, to acknowledge the public nature of your momentary vulnerability without collapsing into shame or exploding into rage. The psychological principle at work here is what therapists call distress tolerance, the ability to survive crisis situations without making them worse through impulsive actions. When you freeze the moment rather than reacting to it, you demonstrate a level of emotional regulation that most people cannot achieve. This display of psychological strength often has a more profound impact on observers than any clever comeback could accomplish. But there is another dimension to this technique. It forces everyone present to confront the reality of what just happened. When someone delivers a particularly harsh insult, and you respond with complete stillness, you make everyone in the room complicit in the aggression. They cannot pretend it was just playful banter or harmless teasing. They must acknowledge that they witnessed an attack, and your refusal to retaliate makes them uncomfortable about their passive participation in it. And this is when you reclaim the moment, not through dominance, but through refusal. Because everyone anticipates a performance, and the most Machiavellian move is to cancel the performance entirely. The concept of canceling the performance deserves elaboration because it touches on something fundamental about human social dynamics. Most interpersonal conflicts operate like theatrical performances with clearly defined roles: aggressor and victim, attacker and defender, dominant and submissive. Everyone present understands their role as audience, and they settle in to watch the drama unfold. But when you refuse to play your assigned role, you disrupt the entire performance. The audience does not know how to respond. The aggressor is left without a scene partner. The expected narrative arc, challenge, response, resolution, collapses. This creates a profound social awkwardness that typically rebounds onto the person who initiated the conflict. Yet sometimes silence proves insufficient. Sometimes you must respond. And when you do, it must be surgical. Here is the formula Machiavelli would employ. Brief, no lengthy rebuttals, precise, one-sentence maximum, irrefutable. It should land like a final verdict, not an opening argument. For instance, if someone calls you false, respond with, "You would recognize it." If they say you are arrogant, respond with, "You are unaccustomed to certainty." If they claim you are overconfident, respond with, "You confuse clarity with noise." Then return to silence. Let them pursue the echo of your words. Let the room process the aftermath. Because now you have accomplished something rare. You have struck back once and with such precision that nothing additional requires saying. This is not a comeback. This is an incision. And Machiavelli always preferred incisions over brawls. Why? Because brawls generate chaos. But incisions create silence. Silence that makes people remember what you did not say and fear what you might still be capable of saying. The surgical response represents the highest level of verbal combat, so precise and economical that it cannot be argued with or escalated from. It is not defensive because it does not attempt to refute the original insult. Instead, it reframes the entire interaction by making a deeper observation about the attacker's psychology or motivations. Notice the structure of these surgical responses. They are all turning the tables by revealing something about the attacker that they probably did not want revealed. You would recognize it implies that the accuser is themselves false, and therefore qualified to spot falseness in others. You are unaccustomed to certainty suggests that what appears as arrogance to them is simply confidence that they have never experienced. You confuse clarity with noise, indicates that their perception is fundamentally flawed. These responses work because they are psychologically accurate. People who are comfortable with falseness in themselves are indeed most likely to see it in others. People who lack genuine confidence often perceive authentic certainty as arrogance. People who think in confused, muddled ways often interpret clarity as aggression or volume. But the key to making these responses effective is the silence that follows. You deliver the line, and then you stop. You do not elaborate, explain, or escalate. You let the words settle into the consciousness of everyone present, including the person who attacked you. This silence is not passive. It is loaded with potential. It suggests that you could say more, much more, but you are choosing restraint. This is how you master insults, not by participating in their game, but by controlling the entire arena. You alter the dynamic. You reverse the framework. You transform every insult into a confession and every silence into a judgment. Most people desire to be correct. Machiavelli desired to be untouchable. This is your target. Not victory over the attacker, but rendering the attack meaningless. Because when people realize that no insult affects you, they cease throwing them. Not from kindness, but from fear of what you might be capable of if you ever chose to speak. The concept of being untouchable requires careful examination because it is often misunderstood. Being untouchable does not mean being invulnerable to all harm or criticism. It does not mean you have no weaknesses or that nothing ever affects you. What it means is that your sense of self is so solidly grounded that external attacks cannot shake your fundamental identity or derail your emotional equilibrium. This kind of psychological untouchability is built through years of inner work, confronting your shadows, integrating your flaws, making peace with your past, developing genuine self-compassion. It cannot be faked or performed. Either you have done the work or you have not, and people can sense the difference immediately. When your untouchability is authentic, it has a peculiar effect on others. Some people are drawn to it, seeking to understand how you maintain such equilibrium. Others are threatened by it because it highlights their own emotional volatility. Still others are inspired by it, seeing in your example the possibility of their own psychological freedom. There exists a moment in every social interaction where power shifts, not because of what is spoken, but because of how someone manages being disrespected. Machiavelli understood this moment intimately. He did not wait for insults to cease. He waited for the correct insult to expose the balance of power. And when it arrived, he did not react emotionally. He made it a public failure, not for himself, but for the one who dared to launch it. This waiting for the correct insult is a sophisticated psychological strategy that requires both patience and psychological acuity. Not every insult is worth responding to. Most are simply emotional noise, expressions of momentary frustration, attempts to gain attention, or reflexive responses to feeling threatened. But occasionally, someone will deliver an insult that perfectly encapsulates the power dynamic in the room, that crystallizes the underlying tensions and rivalries at play. These moments are opportunities. They allow you to demonstrate your psychological superiority not through aggression, but through mastery. When you handle such a moment perfectly, remaining calm while your attacker loses composure, turning their aggression into a mirror of their own insecurity, shifting the room's sympathy from them to you, you establish a new hierarchy of respect and influence. Let me break down exactly how this functions. When someone insults you, they are accepting a risk. They are gambling on your insecurity. They hope to corner you, provoke you, unsettle you. But if you have trained your inner world, if you have practiced stillness the way others practice comebacks, you will do something they never anticipate. You will make the room turn against them. Here is the method. Imagine the insult arrives mid-conversation, subtle, sarcastic, public. Most people either laugh uncomfortably or strike back emotionally. But Machiavelli's approach, he would allow the insult to rest in the air untouched, like rotten fruit thrown onto polished marble. He would let the silence grow, let the insult hang unacknowledged. And then, with complete composure, he would execute one of three strategies. First strategy, pose a genuine question. Something like, "Is this your perception of me?" Now the insulter suddenly finds themselves defensive. They must own what they just declared in front of everyone. Most will not. Most will retreat. No, I did not mean it like that. I was merely joking. Relax. And this is when you have already achieved victory. Because now they have shown the room their insult was cheap. Their dominance was theatrical. And your composure forced them to disown their own statement. A person who retreats from their own words possesses no credibility. And Machiavelli delighted in exposing that fracture. The genuine question technique is particularly effective because it appears to be seeking clarification rather than mounting a defense. This makes it socially acceptable and difficult to criticize. But psychologically, it puts enormous pressure on the attacker because it forces them to take responsibility for their words in a way they probably did not expect. Most insults are delivered with a kind of plausible deniability built in. The attacker can always claim they were just joking, or that you are being too sensitive if challenged. But when you ask for clarification in a calm, straightforward manner, you remove this escape route. They must either own their hostility publicly or retreat from it publicly. Either choice damages their social position. Second strategy, repeat the insult, but without inflection. No tone, no smile, no sarcasm. You think I am a fraud. You believe I am weak. You are saying I do not deserve respect. This is not weakness. This is containment. You are demonstrating that you heard it but will not react as they desire. Now the room is uncomfortable, not because of you, but because you have forced everyone to examine the insult clearly, and most insults collapse when examined slowly. They depend on tone, timing, crowd distraction. They are ambushes. But when you decelerate them, strip away the laugh track, and expose them to silence, people realize, wait, that was not powerful. That was petty. And again, now the attacker appears small, not because you humiliated them, but because you held up a mirror and allowed the silence to complete the work. The repetition technique works by removing all the emotional charge from the insult and presenting it as a simple statement of fact. This has the effect of making everyone present examine the insult objectively, rather than getting caught up in the emotional drama of the moment. When an insult is stripped of its emotional context and timing, it often reveals itself to be much weaker than it appeared in the heat of the moment. This technique also demonstrates remarkable emotional regulation on your part. It shows that you can hear criticism, process it, and respond to it without being overwhelmed by it. This level of self-possession often impresses observers more than any clever comeback could. Third strategy: redirect the spotlight entirely. This represents the most elite response. Allow them to insult you, then immediately pivot the conversation as if nothing significant was said, not in a dismissive manner, but with the smooth confidence of someone who did not even notice the shot. In any case, what I was explaining, let us return our attention to... Right, so the key point was, this tactic accomplishes one powerful thing. It publicly ranks the insult as irrelevant. The attacker gets ignored. The audience sees no flinch, and the narrative continues without them. Now they are trapped. They either escalate and reveal desperation, or remain quiet and accept defeat. Either way, you control the framework. The redirection technique is perhaps the most psychologically sophisticated of the three, because it requires you to maintain complete cognitive control while appearing effortless. You must process the insult, assess its irrelevance to your goals, and smoothly return the conversation to its intended trajectory, all while giving no sign that you have been affected. This technique works because it demonstrates that you operate on a different level of consciousness than your attacker. While they are focused on petty personal attacks, you remain focused on substantive matters. While they are trying to drag the conversation down to the level of ego conflict, you keep it elevated to the level of meaningful discourse. Because Machiavelli's true goal was never to win the insult. His goal was to remove its power from the room entirely. He never defended himself. He allowed the insult to dissolve into silence and redirection until it no longer held any significance. But let us explore darker territory, because sometimes the most effective way to destroy an insult is to validate it on your terms. This is the strategy of deliberate ownership. Let them call you ruthless. You respond, "I prefer the term precise." They call you manipulative. You respond, "People often confuse discipline with control. They mock your past." You respond, "It forged me. I waste nothing." What does this accomplish? It dismantles their attack structure, because now their insult becomes a foundation rather than a weapon. They wanted you to resist. Instead, you redefine. Now the insult becomes part of your mythology. And anyone observing thinks, if that is what they are throwing at him and he remains unmoved, perhaps it is true. And perhaps that is why he is powerful. This is where Machiavelli operated most effectively, where insult becomes legend, where attack becomes signal, where the thing meant to shame you becomes the reason people respect you. The deliberate ownership technique requires the highest level of self-acceptance and psychological integration. You must have made peace with the darker aspects of your personality, what Jung would call your shadow, to the point where you can acknowledge them without shame or defensiveness. This is extraordinarily difficult for most people, which is why this technique is so powerful when executed properly. When you own your supposed flaws and reframe them as strengths or necessary adaptations, you achieve something that few people can. You become immune to that particular line of attack permanently. No one can ever hurt you again by calling you ruthless if you have publicly acknowledged your precision in achieving goals. No one can damage you by calling you manipulative if you have openly discussed your skill at influencing outcomes. But this technique requires careful calibration. You must own the truth of what they are saying while simultaneously reframing it in a way that maintains or enhances your social position. This requires deep self-knowledge, social intelligence, and verbal skill. Consider how this plays out in practice. When someone calls you ruthless, they are trying to make you seem cruel and unfeeling. When you respond with, "I prefer the term precise," you acknowledge that you do indeed act with determined focus to achieve your goals, but you frame this as a virtue rather than a flaw. Precision is something people admire. Ruthlessness is something they fear or condemn. Similarly, when someone calls you manipulative, they are trying to paint you as dishonest and controlling. When you respond with, "People often confuse discipline with control," you acknowledge that you do indeed influence situations and outcomes, but you frame this as disciplined behavior rather than manipulation. Discipline suggests self-mastery and ethical action. Manipulation suggests deception and abuse. And finally, understand this truth. Machiavelli never wanted to avoid insults. He wanted to attract them at the right time from the right people. Because the moment someone insults you publicly, they show everyone else one thing. I view this person as a threat. No one mocks a nobody. No one disrespects someone who is beneath them. They insult because they want to damage your presence. They want to feel taller. This insight reveals something profound about the nature of social dynamics and power. Insults are not random events. They are responses to perceived threats to the insulter's position, status, or self-image. When someone insults you, they are inadvertently announcing to everyone present that they see you as competition, that they feel diminished by your presence, that they need to attack you in order to feel better about themselves. Understanding this dynamic allows you to interpret insults not as judgments on your character, but as information about your social position and the psychological state of those around you. The more successful you become, the more insults you will attract. The more authentic and self-possessed you become, the more threatened others will feel. The more clearly you see and speak truth, the more those living in illusion will try to silence you. So when it happens, do not think, "Why me?" Think, "Of course me," because it means you are visible, and visibility always invites attack. The weak fear it, the mediocre resent it. But the Machiavellian, he welcomes it, because every insult is a test, and every test is an opportunity to show the room that you are not just calm, you are untouchable. Not because you are superior, but because you do not need to fight. You have already won before a single word was ever spoken. There comes a moment, if you handle an insult correctly, where the entire room shifts. Not because you spoke, not because you defended, but because you did nothing. And yet the tension reorganized around you. This is what Machiavelli aimed for. Not the clash, not the applause, but the dominance of stillness so profound that the one who insulted you begins to doubt themselves. This is when the reversal begins. Because here is the secret most people miss. The moment someone insults you and it fails to move you, they feel exposed. Why? Because insults are built on expectation. They rely on prediction. The attacker imagines you will respond emotionally, that you will flinch, that you will stumble. And when you do not, they are left alone on a social stage with a weapon that did not fire. And now they are the one who appears reactive, insecure, desperate. Machiavelli used this dynamic to create a fortress of reputation, not because people feared his words, but because they feared his absence of reaction. A person who does not react to provocation becomes unreadable, and unreadable people are dangerous. Let us go even colder. When you become the kind of person who never defends themselves, who never responds to slander, mockery, or cheap shots, something strange begins to happen. The attacks do not stop. They grow louder. Why? Because people become frustrated when they cannot control you, so they escalate. They push harder. They mock more publicly. They probe in more personal ways, not because you are weak, but because your silence is triggering their insecurity. They need a reaction to validate their power, and every time you refuse to provide it, you are telling them something brutal. I do not need to prove anything, but you do. And the more they escalate without effect, the more everyone watching sees the truth. This is not dominance. This is a tantrum. Now you appear as power, and they appear as desperation. This is what Machiavelli meant when he said, "A prince must learn to appear strong even in stillness, not to intimidate, but to create a presence so stable that even the sharpest insults fall flat against it." And this is what you are building every time you allow an insult to collapse in silence. Not passivity, but presence. The psychological phenomenon behind this escalation is what therapists call extinction burst. When a behavior that previously worked stops working, it often gets worse before it disappears entirely. Your attackers are experiencing this burst because their usual methods of controlling others through provocation are failing against you. They increase the intensity and frequency of their attacks in a desperate attempt to get the reaction they crave. But your continued non-reaction during this phase is what cements your psychological dominance. Anyone observing this dynamic sees clearly who has emotional control and who has lost it. The person escalating appears increasingly unhinged, while you appear increasingly composed. This contrast works powerfully in your favor. However, there is a crucial point to understand about this process. It requires genuine inner stability, not mere performance. If you are suppressing your reactions through willpower alone, the pressure will eventually cause you to explode, which destroys all the psychological capital you have built. The Machiavellian approach requires you to have actually transcended the need for external validation, not simply to be acting as if you have. This is why the inner work, the shadow integration, the self-acceptance, the emotional regulation skills cannot be skipped. Without this foundation, the techniques become manipulative posturing rather than authentic power, and people can sense the difference, even if they cannot articulate it. But let us take it one step further, because sometimes silence is not the end. Sometimes you respond, not to fight, not to explain, but to turn the blade with elegance. This is where the Machiavellian counter-insult emerges. What does this mean? It is not a direct insult. It is a strategic fracture. A phrase so subtle, so calm, so without tone, it does not even register as aggression. It sounds like, "You speak loudest when you are most uncertain." You must have felt compelled to say that. Fascinating. I would not have revealed that about myself so quickly. Now observe what you have accomplished. You did not defend. You did not strike. You made a statement that forces them to reflect and everyone else to reconsider what they just witnessed. This is not retaliation. This is social surgery. You have taken the spotlight off yourself and placed it back on them under a harsher light. And now they are trapped, because if they escalate, they appear unstable. If they retreat, they appear weak. You have boxed them in with fewer than 10 words. This is Machiavellian control. Precision, no wasted movement. The art of the counter-observation lies in its psychological accuracy and its untouchable delivery. These are not random insults thrown back in anger. They are precise diagnoses of the psychological state that led to the original attack. When someone lashes out at you and you calmly observe that they speak loudest when most uncertain, you are making a statement that resonates as true to everyone present, including the attacker themselves. This technique works because it shifts the focus from the content of their attack to the psychology behind it. Instead of defending against their specific accusations, you are commenting on their mental and emotional state. This is a much stronger position because it positions you as the observer rather than the observed, the analyst rather than the analyzed. But timing is crucial with counter-observations. They must come after you have already demonstrated your unshakability. If you lead with them, they can appear defensive or reactive. But when they follow a period of composed silence, they land with devastating effectiveness because they seem to arise from a place of calm analysis rather than emotional reaction. The key to these responses is that they contain uncomfortable truths about human nature that most people recognize but rarely voice. When someone is being loudly aggressive, they often are trying to compensate for inner uncertainty. When someone feels compelled to attack another person, they usually are revealing something about their own psychological state. When someone reveals personal information in the heat of anger, they often are exposing more vulnerability than they intended. By calmly pointing out these patterns, you demonstrate not only psychological sophistication, but also a kind of fearlessness about speaking uncomfortable truths. This combination is both impressive and intimidating to most people. Now let us discuss the long-term strategy. What happens after the insult? Most people move on emotionally, but not strategically. They believe it is finished. Machiavelli understood better, because even if the insult did not land, it remains a signal. This person sees you as a threat. This person is constructing a narrative. This person is planting seeds of perception. So what do? You do not react then, but you remember everything. Their tone, their timing, their audience, their motivation. And later, when it benefits you, not them, you act. You isolate them subtly. You block their influence silently. You speak to their allies with calm suspicion. You ask gentle questions like, "Has he always been this way? I did not expect that from him." You never frame them as an enemy. You simply allow others to reach that conclusion for themselves, and soon they are not insulting anymore. They are explaining. They are correcting. They are backtracking because they realize the person they thought they could challenge with mockery was not someone to mock. This long-term strategic thinking is what separates the Machiavellian approach from mere conflict resolution. Most people want to end conflicts quickly and move on. But Machiavelli understood that how you handle conflict shapes your future relationships and social position. Every interaction is both an immediate challenge and a long-term investment in your reputation and influence. The key insight here is that public insults create lasting impressions on everyone who witnesses them. Your response becomes part of your social identity. People remember not just what was said, but how you handled what was said. This memory influences how they interact with you in the future and what they tell others about you. When you consistently handle insults with composure and wisdom, you build a reputation for psychological strength that precedes you into new situations. People approach you differently when they believe you cannot be rattled or manipulated through emotional provocation. This reputation becomes a protective barrier that actually reduces the number of attacks you face over time. But the strategic memory aspect requires careful judgment. You must distinguish between people who attacked you from genuine hostility and those who were simply having a bad day or acting out of character. The former deserve strategic attention. The latter deserve forgiveness and a chance to redeem themselves. The subtle isolation technique Machiavelli employed involved gradually shifting social networks away from problematic individuals without directly confronting them. This is done through a combination of social positioning and careful information sharing. You position yourself in contexts where their influence is minimized. You build relationships with people who share your values and judgment. You ask questions that allow others to draw their own conclusions about someone's character. This approach is far more effective than direct confrontation because it allows the problematic person's own behavior to do the work of damaging their reputation. You do not need to convince anyone that someone is untrustworthy if they consistently demonstrate untrustworthiness in their interactions with others. The phrase, "Has he always been this way? I did not expect that from him," is particularly effective because it accomplishes several things simultaneously. It expresses surprise and disappointment without making direct accusations. It invites the other person to share their own observations and experiences. It suggests that the behavior was inappropriate without seeming vindictive or petty. Most importantly, it plants a seed of doubt that grows through confirmation bias. Once someone starts looking for problematic behavior from a particular person, they become much more likely to notice it when it occurs. This is not manipulation if the behavior is genuinely problematic. It is simply drawing attention to patterns that were already there. You want to master insult control? Burn this into your consciousness. Never react when they expect it. Never defend when they attack your image. Never explain when they distort your words. Never joke when they test your strength. And never fight when silence will bury them deeper. Instead, let the insult reveal them, not you. Let your silence create confusion, not validation. Let your stillness become the story people tell after you leave. Because the person who flinches becomes the target. But the person who absorbs and observes, he becomes the threat they cannot quite figure out, the presence they cannot diminish, the reputation that begins to grow without a single word of defense. This summary encapsulates the entire Machiavellian philosophy of insult management, but it deserves deeper exploration because each principle contains layers of psychological and social wisdom. Never react when they expect it means understanding that most insults are designed to provoke specific responses. The insulter has imagined how you will react, and they have prepared for that reaction. When you refuse to play your expected role, you disrupt their entire strategic framework. Never defend when they attack your image recognizes that defense validates the premise of the attack. When you defend yourself against an accusation, you implicitly acknowledge that the accusation is worth defending against. But when you ignore the accusation entirely, you suggest that it is too insignificant to merit a response. Never explain when they distort your words. Understands that explanations often make you appear guilty or defensive. Moreover, people who are motivated to misunderstand you will continue to misunderstand your explanations. Your energy is better spent on clear future communication than on correcting past misinterpretations. Never joke when they test your strength prevents you from deflecting serious challenges through humor. While humor can be an effective social tool, using it to avoid confronting direct challenges can make you appear weak or unserious about your boundaries. Never fight when silence will bury them deeper. Recognizes that some opponents defeat themselves if given enough rope. Fighting them directly gives them legitimacy and attention. Ignoring them allows their own behavior to discredit them. The final insight, that the person who absorbs and observes becomes a threat that others cannot figure out, points to something profound about human psychology. We are most afraid of what we cannot predict or control. A person who responds predictably to provocation can be managed and manipulated. But a person who responds unpredictably, or who does not respond at all, cannot be controlled through conventional means. This unpredictability creates a kind of psychological leverage. People become more careful around you because they do not know what will provoke you or how you will respond if provoked. They assume you know something they do not, or that you have capabilities they cannot assess. This assumption often leads to more respectful treatment, even from those who might otherwise be hostile. If this content resonates with you, click the subscribe button and join this community of people who choose depth over surface, truth over comfort. But before we conclude, let us examine one final aspect of the Machiavellian approach that is often overlooked: the cultivation of strategic empathy. This might seem contradictory to everything we have discussed, but it is actually the foundation that makes all the techniques possible. Strategic empathy means understanding not just what people are doing, but why they are doing it. When someone insults you, they are usually expressing some form of psychological pain, inadequacy, fear, frustration, envy. The Machiavellian does not respond to this pain with matching pain, but with understanding that allows for strategic response. This is not the same as sympathy or compassion, though it may include those elements. Strategic empathy is about understanding human psychology so deeply that you can predict and influence behavior without becoming emotionally entangled in it. You see their pain, you understand its source, and you respond in ways that serve your long-term interests, while potentially helping them see their own patterns more clearly. When you understand that insults come from insecurity, mockery comes from envy, and aggression comes from fear, you stop taking these things personally. You see them as information about the other person's psychological state, rather than judgments on your character. This understanding is what allows you to remain calm in the face of provocation. But strategic empathy also means recognizing when someone is genuinely struggling and when someone is simply behaving badly. The person lashing out from temporary stress or pain deserves different treatment than the person who habitually uses aggression to manipulate others. The Machiavellian approach includes wisdom about when to show mercy and when to demonstrate strength. The ultimate goal is not to become cold or calculating in the sociopathic sense, but to develop such emotional and social intelligence that you can navigate complex interpersonal dynamics without losing yourself in them. You maintain your center while helping others find theirs, or at least while protecting yourself from those who have lost theirs. This brings us to the integration phase of understanding. How do you actually develop these capabilities? How do you build the inner stability that makes the external techniques possible? First, you must do the psychological work of understanding your own triggers and patterns. What kinds of insults actually affect you? What underlying fears or insecurities do they target? Until you understand your own psychological landscape, you cannot navigate others' attempts to manipulate it. Second, you must practice emotional regulation in low-stakes situations. Learn to observe your emotions without being controlled by them. Develop the ability to feel anger without expressing it, to feel hurt without showing it, to feel fear without being paralyzed by it. This is not suppression. It is conscious choice about when and how to express what you feel. Third, you must study human psychology and social dynamics. Read about cognitive biases, defense mechanisms, personality types, and group behavior. The more you understand about how humans function psychologically, the better you can predict and respond to their behavior. Fourth, you must practice these techniques in gradually more challenging situations. Start with minor provocations from people whose opinions do not matter to you. Build your confidence and skill before facing major challenges from people who can significantly impact your life. Finally, you must develop genuine self-worth that is independent of others' opinions. This is perhaps the most difficult but most important element. If your sense of self depends on external validation, you will always be vulnerable to those who threaten to withdraw that validation. But if your sense of self comes from your own values, achievements, and growth, then external attacks lose their power to wound you. What psychological insights does this reveal about your own reactions to insults? Think about the last time someone attempted to provoke you. Did you react from strength or from the wound they were trying to expose? Have you noticed patterns in the types of insults that affect you most deeply? What do these patterns reveal about areas where you might need to develop greater self-acceptance or emotional resilience? These questions are not merely academic. They point toward the practical work of developing psychological strength. The Machiavellian approach to insults is not a set of tricks or techniques. It is the external expression of internal mastery. You cannot fake this kind of composure, and you cannot perform this kind of strength. You must actually develop it through sustained inner work and practice. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What aspects of insult management do you find most challenging? Have you noticed how your responses to criticism change as you develop greater self-awareness and emotional regulation? The path to becoming uninsultable is not easy, but it is available to anyone willing to do the work. It requires confronting uncomfortable truths about yourself, developing emotional skills that most people never learn, and practicing new ways of responding to provocation until they become natural. But the rewards extend far beyond simply handling insults more effectively. When you develop genuine psychological strength, you become more attractive to high-quality people, more effective in professional situations, more capable of intimate relationships, and more able to pursue your authentic goals without being derailed by others' opinions or attacks. And that is how Machiavelli would transform an insult. Not by overpowering the attacker, but by making everyone else realize that person is not someone you try to humiliate, unless you are prepared to be humiliated by your own attempt. Understanding this psychological mastery connects directly to recognizing weakness in others. Because once you've developed immunity to insults, you begin to see the patterns that reveal who operates from genuine strength versus manufactured confidence. The ability to spot these distinctions becomes crucial for navigating any environment where power dynamics matter.